And we are back. Last week, at the latest episode of Against the Stream, we said that America might enter Israel's war on Iran. In the past 7 days, that has happened. Donald Trump entered the war on Iran and just as quickly left it again, declaring a full victory. But who won this 12-day war and what does it mean for the region in the next period? Those are the questions that we'll try to answer in this special episode of Against the Stream. My name is Hamid Alizadeh. I'm here today again with Jorge Martin. And Jorge, we weren't supposed to record this episode. We were supposed to be on break. But obviously, this is a big event. This is another war that American imperialism has fought, and it has wide-ranging repercussions for the world. So why don't we start with, maybe you can take us through the basic kind of course of events in the past 7 days.
Yes, as probably everyone knows by now, last Thursday, Donald Trump said that he probably needed about 2 weeks to decide whether he was going to go into the war in Iran or not on the side of Israel. But we now know that that was meant to be a deception, and that already plans were in place to bomb Iran. And this bombing took place on Saturday night, early hours of Sunday, with B-2 and B-2 bombers, which came straight from the United States, didn't stop at any bases. They were not transported to, say, the Chagos Islands in the Indian Ocean or anything like this. They went straight from the United States. They entered Iranian airspace. Iranian air defenses had been depleted by Israeli attacks previously. And they bombed 3 different nuclear facilities, Esfahan, Fordo, and Natanz. And then they went straight back to the United States, and Trump had a big press conference saying basically that the Iranian nuclear program had been obliterated, capitals and exclamation mark. And therefore, this was the end of this war. He was very insistent that this was the case. Also, Marco Rubio said that no U.S. bases in the region had been used for this attack, and therefore they were not fair game for retaliation on the part of Iran. And immediately, almost in quick succession, Donald Trump declared that a ceasefire had been agreed. There was a number of conversations. Trump apparently was talking directly to Netanyahu. Witkoff, Marco Rubio, and others were talking via Qatar and Oman with the Iranians. They were indicating about this ceasefire. But basically, Trump declared the ceasefire and said that everyone had to comply. There was also some confusion about the exact timing, because he said 6 hours, then he said 12 hours, and it wasn't all very clear. And then on Monday morning, we woke up. This was quite surprising in itself, but there is an explanation for this. But then on Monday morning, we woke up to the news that there had been one last Israeli wave of strikes against Iran. And Iran had retaliated. Apparently, the Israelis claimed that this last attack by Iran with missiles was outside of the timing of the ceasefire, and therefore they had the right to retaliate. And this seemed to kind of follow a classic Netanyahu script, whereby he accuses the other part of breaking a ceasefire in order to continue the war that he never wanted ended. But this time Trump replied. He seemed really angry. I think he was really angry, and he said in a press conference, he said these Israeli planes must immediately be turned back. They cannot unload the bombs. This is a complete scandal. I'm very angry at Israel. Although he also said he was angry at Iran, but mainly at Israel. And this was the clearest and most public demonstration of the tensions between Trump and Netanyahu. And yes, in effect, Israel was forced, strong-armed, into stopping the bombing of Iran. And so now it's 4 days later, the ceasefire seems to be holding. So this is one part of what's been happening. In the meantime, Iran was allowed to retaliate, or to appear to retaliate for the U.S. bombing. They had promised that they had threatened there will be retaliation, serious retaliation, U.S. assets in the region or targets of the U.S. will be attacked by Iran, which I will say they are in the full right to do. They've just been attacked by the United States. But in the end, it all ended with an attack. I think by 14 missiles were launched at a military base in Qatar. But the United States already knew about this. All of the missiles were intercepted, apart from one which fell in the desert. The base was empty. And this was just mostly for show, i.e. to allow the Iranians to say that they had retaliated, but there was no real danger. And immediately after, Marco Rubio said, okay, this is the end of it. We're not going to escalate. The Iranians were also not keen to escalate. So yeah, the ceasefire seems to be holding. Trump has claimed a massive victory, once in a lifetime victory. He's a really strong leader. He likes to talk himself up. But even then, since he declared his victory, it was a bit like, when Bush said mission accomplished. It was that kind of thing. There has been a leaked report from the Defense Intelligence Agency, and this was leaked to the media, and it seemed to indicate that the damage particularly to Fordo wasn't as much as Trump said. I mean, Trump said it had been obliterated. And this report seemed to indicate, from what the media published, that in fact some of the entrances had collapsed, but it wasn't clear whether the actual facility and deep underground had been hit or not, had been damaged or not. And it said, the report also hinted that Iran had removed about 400 kilos of enriched uranium material from the facility ahead of the US strike. So the whole presentation by Trump, I hesitate to use the word narrative because I don't really like it. But anyway, the presentation, the publicity by Trump that he had his decisive strike had obliterated the nuclear program of Iran was immediately contradicted by US intelligence sources. And yeah, I think that this is more or less what's happened in the last few days. I would like to say, I think we need to make this point, that while everyone is looking at this and how a wider regional war has been averted for now, we will discuss more about that, the massacre of the Palestinians in Gaza continues unabated. Every day there's 50, 80, 100 people killed. Mostly when they're going to get aid that's now being distributed by this new so-called agency. So yeah, there might be a temporary ceasefire in Iran that we can now examine. But Netanyahu is far from over in his genocidal campaign in Gaza, the West Bank, and so on. He is also bombed since Lebanon again, and so on. Yeah.
And Syria.
Syria, yes.
This last week when we ended the show, we were saying that it wasn't clear what Trump was going to do, because on the one hand, he has got, he stood on a program of peace. And it's clear that from his point of view, he is much more in favor of negotiations than going to war. That's just his personal preference, not for any particular moral reasons, but because he thinks that's more efficient. And he's got a MAGA base, a big part of his support base in the U.S., the working class, large parts of the petty bourgeois who support him, are dead set against new wars, new adventures. And on the other hand, he had built up a rhetoric, right? Because we knew that since coming to power, he hasn't really carried out any of his promises. None of his major policies have actually been carried out. And he was seen humiliated in front of Putin. He promised to end the war in 48 hours. Then it was 100 days. And then, all of that is gone now. And it's clear that Putin will not accept his terms. And he's been humiliated in many ways. And being an egomaniac, I think also, and a narcissist, probably does play an important role in this, and and at the same time, you have Netanyahu forcing his hand, insisting that the Israelis were going to go ahead with this regardless, and also succeeding in the first, spectacularly succeeding in the first days and hours of the war, which gave, I guess, Trump a certain sense of security and confidence that it can go. And then he bought into it essentially. But as soon as things became a little bit clearer that is not as simple as that, then he was a hostage to his own rhetoric, because then he had the mass dissatisfaction from his MAGA base. There were prominent Trump supporters like Tucker Carlson and others who came out against him. The war, it was clear, could not continue. We'll get back to that later on. And a withdrawal would humiliate him in front of his base and in front of the hawks, the neocons, the old Democratic and Republican establishment who were gung-ho for this war. And on a world stage, he would look like a toothless, tiger. So he kind of backed himself up into this thing. But in reality, if you want to understand, I think a lot of people are trying to understand the extreme, frantic, manic kind of...
Yeah, there's one more thing I forgot to say,
Right.
is that in the immediate aftermath, when he said he had obliterated the nuclear program and so on, he then, for the first time, hinted at regime change. He said, well, regime change is not politically correct, but maybe we should use it and make Iran great again. So he was now completely deluded himself into thinking that this was possible. This was obviously the plan of Netanyahu all along. But this lasted for about 5 minutes or so. Immediately he said, no, we're not about regime change. And there are reasons for that, clearly.
Yeah. And what I think all of this shows, this kind of frantic switching left and right. One is clear that he does not have a strategy. That's absolutely clear to everyone. But beyond a certain general sense of where he wants to go. But also, he's being torn apart by different and opposing forces. Mm-hmm. In particular, one, you have the working class, the majority of the American masses who do not want war, do not want any more military and imperialist adventures. And then you have the neocons. I forgot. Last week I forgot the name. This week. So what's the guy?
You mean Lindsey Graham?
Lindsey Graham, yes. and those types who are pushing for war, insisting. This DIA report, by the way, is quite a way of trying to humiliate him for not going further, trying to goad him into continuing. And then you have Netanyahu and the Israeli ruling class, which see Iran as an existential threat, and they have even less qualms and even less compromises. They're even less willing to compromise. And Trump trying to balance all of these, that is really what's happening. And he thinks that he can negotiate his way through with great the art of the deal, and he's going to talk his way. But the fact is, there are facts on the ground. These are actual social forces. And of course, then you have Iran, which is also a fact on the ground, that you can't just destroy, you can't just wipe it off, you can't just convince, because there's also social processes that are pulling in certain directions in Iran. And so that's where we kind of end up with this very schizophrenic situation, frantically switching from one side to another. And trying to appear like he's in control of everything. Mm-hmm. Everything was planned in advance. We all knew this was all along planned. Everyone knew what was in on it, and it was all tricks and and so on. In reality, he was being dragged along by social forces outside of his control.
Yes.
But then the question is, what's this war about? Because Iran did not pose any immediate threat whatsoever to the US or to Israel. They say that, Iran was building a nuclear bomb. That is not the case. Khamenei stopped the actual weapons part of the program in 2003. The Iranians have not been wanting to have a bomb. Even according to CIA reports, that were
Yes.
presented recently, it was Iran was 3 years at least. If it chose to build one, it was at least 3 years from building one.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't unprovoked attack Israel or the US. In fact, the whole time it was trying to get a deal.
Mm-hmm.
More than anything, because they need the money. They need a trade deal with the West. They need investments because the regime is in very dire straits.
Mm-hmm.
The country is falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
And these guys are bazaars. These are traders. They want a deal. That is the mentality of the Iranian regime.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think is behind the war?
Yeah, I mean, as you yourself explained in the last episode, one very strong factor in all of this is Netanyahu's own personal survival, right? In the last 20 months, every time it looked like the constitutional crisis, the crisis of the regime inside Israel, the mass movement against him was about to tip over his very fragile coalition government, he then launched another invasion. An attack on Lebanon, bombing of the Iranian embassy compound in Syria. He was trying to provoke a regional war all the time. And not only provoke a regional war, but also get the United States involved on site. And the reason for this is twofold, I will say. His own personal survival. He thinks that by winning a war and being a strong leader that guarantees the security of Israel, he will be able to win a next election. It seems that this is not the case, by the way. The latest opinion polls in Israel have given him better numbers. He's gone up by 4 points in the opinion polls, but this has been at the expense of his coalition partners. So basically, his bloc still will not have a majority in the next parliament if there were elections now. So even though there was some hints that he might call an early election, now this is being put on ice. But this is one reason. The other reason I will say is that from the point of view of the Israeli ruling class, the Zionist ruling class at the head of the Israeli state, Iran is an existential threat. Not because Iran is building a nuclear weapon that's going to use against... but because Israel, the Israeli ruling class, want to be the only dominant imperialist power in the region that tells everyone else what to do. And from that point of view, Iran is not complying. And Iran is helping other people who are also not complying. Hezbollah in Lebanon, who defeated the Israeli invasion in the previous war, Hamas and a number of these forces, the Yemenis. And so this is a danger for Israel from the point of view of the interest, not of the Israeli people, but the point of view of the Israeli ruling class and its imperialist ambitions in the region. And this is why I will say the war aims were threefold, right? One was to destroy the Israeli nuclear program. The Iranian nuclear program, i.e. to prevent, to throw back the nuclear program by years, and the other one was to destroy their ability to launch missiles, and the third one was regime change. And this time they went really hard at this question of regime change. I've seen some reports that say that, well, apart from the fact that they commandeered the television in Iran, they started broadcasting messages to the Iranian population. They made very clear, open statements. They were threatening the families of high-ranking officials in the Iranian government that if their relatives, the officials, will not resign and defect to I don't know what, to the West, that their families will be killed. So this is pretty terrorist. I mean, this is against all international law, but obviously that doesn't really matter. So they were going for this. Regime change was part of the way they wanted to achieve their aims. Now, have they achieved any of this? I would say no. In the main, they have not destroyed the nuclear program. We can discuss this in more detail. They have obviously they have hit Iran very hard. They have depleted the air defenses. That's very clear. They have partially destroyed some of the missile launching batteries and stuff like that. but they have not destroyed Iranians' missiles by any stretch of imagination. There's still thousands of them. And there are commentators in Israel that said that Iran was holding back on the most advanced types of weapons, of missiles. And certainly they haven't achieved regime change. If anything, the regime has, at least temporarily, come out of this strengthened, as it tends to happen when a regime is under foreign attack. And on the other hand, Israel has also shown the limitations of its military power. The rate of interception of missiles was already going down. There were commentators in the bourgeois media saying that the air defenses were becoming depleted after 10, 12 days of the war. And this is exactly how long the war lasted. And in a report today in the Financial Times, they said that even though some of the Iranian missiles were not completely accurate, but the thousands of buildings were destroyed in Israel. And this has an important psychological impact on the Israeli population. The Israeli Zionist ruling class has always based themselves on the idea that the air defenses are completely hermetic, impenetrable, and that they are the best guarantee that the Jewish people in Israel have of defending their livelihood against foreign enemies, intent of destroying them. And this has now been proven to be not completely true at the very least. So yes.
I had a meeting with some of our comrades earlier this week, and one of them said, I think what really summed it up is that the Israeli ruling class want to restore the old status quo. Mm-hmm. And I think that really sums up the situation, because in order to understand all of these tensions, we have to really go back to the Iraq War. Mm-hmm. Because when America invaded Iraq, they destroyed the Iraqi state and the Iraqi army. Mm-hmm. And what had happened up until then, in fact, U.S. policy had been to have a kind of an equilibrium between the Iraqi and the Iranian army. So they could kind of cancel each other out. And then U.S. imperialism, along with, with their proxies or allies in Saudi Arabia and in Israel, could do whatever they pleased in the rest of the region. But once they destroyed the Iraqi state, that threat was gone. And in fact, Iranian influence in Iraq massively grew, political influence, on the basis of fighting against American imperialism and the mm-hmm. occupation. Mm-hmm. That meant that suddenly Iran expanded massively throughout the region, politically and militarily. And economically, it became a threat, basically.
And this was strengthened during the Syrian civil war.
This was strengthened during Syria at every step, except for the past year and a half. Mm-hmm. Every step has been moving forward. Every time there's been a crisis of government in Yemen, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Gaza, and West Bank, Iranian groups and political forces, Iranian-supported political forces have increased their influence, and that is obviously a threat to American domination of the region, mm-hmm. and to Israeli domination of the region. The Israeli ruling class and the American old guard ruling class, let's say the non-Trumpers, Democrats mm-hmm. and Republicans alike, have this idea that, especially in the U.S. after this collapse of the Soviet Union, they came out as the only superpower on the planet. No one was allowed to oppose them in any way, shape, or form, and anyone who did was punished severely. We saw Iraq invaded 3 times, mm-hmm. Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. They intervened with diminishing results. Ukraine. But the idea was, we can't let anything go. We need to consolidate and re-emphasize our hegemony, our total domination, as you said. The Israeli ruling class sees the same thing, but for Israel, Iran is more an existential threat. On the one hand, there's a nuclear question, mm-hmm. which is a small country. 3 nuclear bombs on the major cities, that would be it. Mm-hmm. So from that point of view, militarily, a nuclear-powered Iran would be a very significant, not that they would use it, but it would mean that Israel could not do anything without mm-hmm. Iranian acquiescence. But also from a more how do you say, long-term point of view, Iran is a huge country with enormous natural resources. It's got 92 million population, a strong industrial base.
Something that Ted Cruz didn't know
Something
about.
that Ted Cruz did not know in his interview with Tucker Carlson. Anyone want to look that up? That's a hilarious clip where Tucker Carlson exposes Ted Cruz's ignorance. But it means that if it is allowed to develop on a capitalist basis, it will supersede Israel. Israel is a small country with very few natural resources. And so in order to maintain its domination of the region, the Israeli capitalist class needs to keep Iran down, which is why, in fact, the policy that they've been pursuing for the past 10 or 20 years has been one of dissolving Iran, supporting terrorist groups, supporting nationalist groups. They've been supporting the Kurdish struggle, not because it's funny because Palestine, they don't support the right of self-determination of an oppressed layer, but in words they've been supporting a Kurdish independent state. Of course, the most reactionary parts of the Kurdish nation are the ones they support. But why? Because that would break up Iraq, Turkey, Syria, and Iran, and it would undermine these. So
you were saying that they've also been
imperialism.
You were saying they've also been supporting Azeri nationalism inside Iran.
Yeah, well, there's little evidence for that, but I'm convinced that they definitely have some influence there. Baluchis, Kurdish, Azeri, potentially also Arab nationalist groups. Although we have to say most of these groups in Iran, even though they are oppressed, they are not cessationists. They're not seeking independence. The majority of them still want to maintain autonomy and national rights within an Iranian nation. But therefore, none of these things will actually satisfy the needs of Israeli imperialism to dominate absolutely. And therefore, what we have now is a war that hasn't really solved it. It's just pushed the ball down the line. The Iranian, as you said, even the war aims, the immediate war aims were not achieved. The nuclear program was not destroyed. They talk about obliteration, but was J.D. Vance has to come back and admit that they've set it back substantially, which is not what they said in the beginning. They said, we're not going to stop until we get this down, right? They get the whole thing dismantled. Khamenei is missing, by the way, but he was saved. His regime was saved. There is going to be probably a regime crisis. We'll talk about that later. But the Iranian regime was saved. There was a rallying around the flag, and the nation remains united. There's no cessationist, sectarian rise of sectarian violence of any sort. And that's why we have what we have is probably going to be a very fragile peace, which could break at any point. And in fact, Donald Trump thinks he was so clever that he just came in, surgical strike, and removed all obstacles. But if I were an Iranian, the ruler, an Iranian capitalist ruler, let's just say an Iranian bourgeois, I would think, you cannot trust the Americans.
Exactly.
They negotiated with them for years. They got a deal with Obama. As soon as Trump came to power, he tore it apart. Then Biden said, he's going to restore relations with Iran.
Can I just say that the deal they had actually included that they will not enrich uranium for military purposes. So they'd already agreed to that, and then there was still Trump broke the deal.
Yeah, he broke the deal, and then Biden said he was going to restore it. He didn't restore it. Then Trump came back and he said, "Okay, let's negotiate." The Iranians said, "We're ready to negotiate," and in the middle of the negotiations, he started bombing them. So
and by the way, he bombed them following a plan that had been developed under the Biden administration. So, I mean, what's the difference in practical terms?
Exactly. All of the test flights for these bombings were carried out. All the exercises and training missions were done during the Biden administration. So if I was an Iranian ruler, I would think, you can't trust these guys. The only, actually, not having a bomb, not having a nuclear bomb, was what got them attacked.
Yes,
that was the fact. And so, barring a total capitulation, the only solution you have now is to double down and continue that same, down that line, which again solves nothing, and which means that the two nations would be at collision course with each other. But there's also the question about Israel. You've been looking into this. You said that Netanyahu has only marginally...
Yes, an opinion poll. I mean, during the 12-day war, obviously his standing increased. This is not the same as the war in Gaza, where there is a massive split in Israeli society. And in fact, now there is a majority of Israeli society is against the war in Gaza. Not from the point of view necessarily that they support the rights of the Palestinians or anything like this, but that they can see that Netanyahu is not interested in getting the hostages back, and that his tactics achieve the opposite of that. And so majority of Israeli society, in opinion poll after opinion poll, they've said in recent times that they will prefer a complete deal, a full deal with Hamas, meaning leaving Hamas intact, releasing all the Palestinian prisoners in exchange for all the hostages and so on. So there is a big split on that question. But on the question of Iran, the whole of Israeli public opinion, but also the whole of the ruling class is united. They say, yes, Iran is a threat. We need regime change in Iran and so on. So during the 12-day war and in the immediate aftermath, his standing went up. His popularity went up. For the first time, people prefer him as the next prime minister, as opposed to what was happening in the past, where he was second. But in reality, in the actual opinion, the detail of the opinion polls, his party has gone up by only 4 points. And this has been at the expense of the far-right elements, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who are part of his coalition. So he will not be in a stronger position to form government after an election. So after an initial idea, there was hints that he was going to call an early election. Now this has been ditched quite clearly, and he will. And he needs something. He needs another war. Today I read that I think it's Smotrich has threatened to leave the government if aid to Gaza continues, under the excuse that aid to Gaza, which is now outside of the control of the Gazan government, is going through the hands of Hamas. So Smotrich is found another reason to threaten Netanyahu. Netanyahu has no other option than to give in. And the war in Gaza continues. The further assaults on the Palestinians in the West Bank continue. So this is the situation in Israel. Temporarily, very temporarily, in a very fragile manner, I would say that Netanyahu has come out strengthened, but this cannot last long, because nothing fundamental has been resolved in reality. I just wanted to add one thing. When you were saying before that Iran is a threat to Israel, what we're saying is that Iran, the ruling class of Iran, is in competition with the ruling class of Israel. Iran is not a threat to the population of Israel. In fact, I will say the population of Israel's main threat is the Zionist ruling class that continues to oppress the Palestinians, making the conditions for peaceful life completely impossible, that continues to have imperialist ambitions in the whole region, which lead to endless one war after another, that puts the life of the people, the inhabitants of Israel, at risk. That is the case.
Yeah, there's been a couple of very interesting articles in The Economist and Financial Times, which both make the same point. Gideon Rahman in Financial Times, he wrote a very interesting article called "Trump's Fragile Peace in the Middle East," and talking about Israel, he says Netanyahu the Netanyahu government and most of its plausible successors seem committed to national security strategy based on regional hegemony.
Exactly.
That has been established for now. But for a country of 10 million people, in a region of several hundred million, this will always remain a tenuous achievement. And The Economist makes the same point. They say, Mr. Netanyahu said after the Iran ceasefire that Israel has placed itself in the first rank of the world's major powers. That's a quote by Netanyahu. That's how puffed up they are on their own
Sees
success.
himself, yeah.
But it lacks the scale to act as a permanent hegemon of the Middle East. And that's the whole point, that it's shooting heavily above its weight. And that has been exposed in this war.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that also explains Trump's insistence on cutting the war short when he did, just going in and coming out. There's Haaretz, which is a liberal paper, they wrote, while Israel's military effort has been extraordinarily successful over the last 12 days, it has also demonstrated its limitations against a distant and powerful enemy, such as Iran, and utter dependence on the US, even in the face of existential threats. Mm-hmm. Much as Israel's war effort was predicated on an American strike, a successful end to the war is now contingent on Trump's ability to conduct effective coercive diplomacy. Mm-hmm. In fact, they couldn't achieve anything. In a long term, it was clear that they couldn't really sustain this by themselves. You said you were saying that in the Western press they talked about only 12 days of missile defenses remaining, and in fact there was a very interesting kind of rundown investigation into these missile defenses by a website called Arms Control Wonk. They've taken the videos of a Jordanese photographer on Instagram. He posted videos of 6 missile strikes from Iran. So this is not nowhere near all of the ones they did, but 6 of them. And in these, he counted that this website counted that they used 39 THAAD interceptors, which are U.S.
Yes.
missile defenses, and what was it? 30. I can't find the figure. 34 Arrow 3s, which are the Israeli ones. Mm-hmm. Now, the total cost of these is around 600-700 million, just for these 6 strikes, and the production rate of these, the Israeli ones is not clear, but it's very small because these are extremely high tech missiles. They cost $4 million a piece. The American ones cost $12 million a piece. And this year, the production rate is 12 overall. So this feeds into the general lack of missile defense capabilities of the West, that the Ukrainians now also realize, and the Israelis obviously don't. So this means that in a long war, where Iran could mobilize millions of people in a war economy to build missiles, to build bombs, or whatever, they would quickly deplete Israeli thing, and that shows the balance of forces between the two nations in terms of industrial base and population and national resources. Which one can succeed? And all of that was exposed as well. And the idea that Israel was impenetrable, Israeli defenses were impenetrable, as you said, the psychological impact of the Israeli working class, seeing that there's 10,000 homes were destroyed, raining of missiles day after day, and then the interception rate going down progressively from 90% to about 65% towards the end. All of that does not show is in a contrast with Netanyahu's claim that Israel is now a first-rank major world power. You know, and obviously that's going to have some repercussions in the future. Then there's a question of Iran. What is the way forward for Iran now, in your opinion?
Yes, I mean, as you said before, the Iranians now have lost any trust they might have had in the United States as a serious and reliable negotiating partner. Obviously, they were at loggerheads before. They couldn't reach an agreement, but they were coming close to it. But now they don't trust them because they from their point of view, and they are right, from their point of view, the United States was negotiating and then next minute is bombing them. So, and the Iranian leadership has already said that they will not give up uranium enrichment, which, by the way, uranium enrichment is not just used for making a bomb, it's also used for civilian purposes. And this is kind of the main demand of the United States, which is imperialist bullying, right? It's saying, no, you cannot have this technology just because I say so. And you are a dominated country, and I'm an imperialist country. And if you do not comply, we'll bomb you to... So I mean, this is quite something, but obviously the Iranians, and if anything, if you follow the logic argument, the Iranians will have drawn the conclusion that the reason they were bombed, as you said, is because they didn't have the bomb. I mean, Saddam Hussein did not have weapons of mass destruction. It stopped its production of weapons of mass destruction after the first Gulf War in '91, and then he was invaded. Because of that. And so, if anything, I will say the Iranian leadership will be pushed towards accelerating their plans for acquiring a nuclear bomb. I don't know whether they will be able, or it's completely in their interest to go all the way, or just threaten to go all the way as a negotiating tactic. But in any case, I think it's very difficult for the Iranian regime now to make any further concessions in the negotiations, because then they will have seen as completely losing face. And this is also important from the point of view of the standing of the Iranian regime inside Iran. This is a corrupt capitalist regime that is helped, I will say, is helped partially by these sanctions, right? Because then it can point out the blame to foreign pressure, which is true. I mean, the sanctions have really hit hard the Iranian economy and the Iranian working class as a whole. So I will say that, and they also said throughout this, I mean, if you listen to the official statements, right? Official statements are never really true. But if you listen to the official statements, you can't help but feel sympathy for what the Iranians are saying. They say, look, we don't want a ceasefire. It's just a question that the Israelis have attacked us. They need to stop attacking us. And then we will stop retaliating. So I mean that's the situation. But I will say that the Iranian regime has come out also temporarily strengthened. Is shown its ability to survive. They said that the nuclear enrichment program has been set back, but only partially, and the missile capacity is still there. Obviously, the air defenses have been massively depleted. They killed a whole number of top people in the army command, but the regime has survived this, and this is to their credit in front of the Iranian masses, in front of a massive foreign attack by the most powerful imperialist power on earth, the United States, and its local puppet. And they have resisted. So, yeah, I don't think they will be in any mood to make any further concessions at the negotiating table. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons why Trump was saying, maybe we don't need an agreement with the Iranians because we've already destroyed them. Because he thinks he can get one.
Yeah, I mean, who knows what Trump thinks. But... Yes, Netanyahu a couple of months ago said that what he wants in Iran is a Libya type of deal, because what happened was that Gaddafi, they had a certain amount of I think chemical weapons and some long range missiles, and in return for handing them in and destroying them, they opened up trade with the EU, and the West opened up trade with Libya, which is
not only that. Libya and Syria joined the war on terror, and there were rendition flights in Libya and so on. They collaborated fully with Western imperialism.
The CIA would abduct people, take them to these countries to torture them, and And what happened with Gaddafi? He was overthrown, and he was well, if not invaded, then definitely overthrown,
Bombed.
and his country overrun with Western-backed jihadi madmen. Alan Woods, our comrade Alan Woods, was saying the other day. He said, "Well, I think I don't know if he said it in a meeting we were at or in the phone call with me. He said, well, if they withdraw from the nuclear, if they abide by the demand to completely dismantle the nuclear program, then the next thing will be that the missile defenses, the missile program be wound down, which is exactly what the Israeli is demanding. And then they should also stop supporting these groups in the rest of the region, which means what? Which means that Iran becomes, like Syria is today, a free haven for Israeli and American forces to go in and attack and bomb and to keep it subjugated, essentially.
Exactly.
And that is the path. I think what's happening now in Iran is there is a crisis of regime brewing, because you've seen, on the one hand, a huge layer at the top of the regime has been wiped out. The first generation that participated in the 1979 revolution, counter-revolution, are dying out. A lot of them are very, very old. Khamenei is 84, 85 years old. And a lot of them have been killed. And what you have is in the military ranks is a new generation of people who participated in the wars against the Americans in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon. And they have a different outlook. The old rulers, the old ruling clique was based on kind of leaning in one side, negotiating and playing a little bit of hardball, but always very conservative, very, how do you say, trying to balance at all point and never really taking big provocative steps forward, but just trying to kind of maintain themselves and take an opportunity when it arises in terms of the region. These guys are saying, we should also say they used to balance between the liberals, who are very pro-Western, who just want to open up the country, and who are much more in favor of dismantling the whole defense program that they have, and the more hardliners, who are the more gung-ho ones. But now what's happening is that the central forces are being degraded. I mean, Khamenei has not been seen for a week. And who has run the country? That's the question. It's clear that he still wields enormous power. But in a fast-paced war, other people have taken power. Other people have been running the country. Probably the more hardline second-generation Revolutionary Guards people. And then you have the president's wing, which is the liberal bourgeoisie, the liberal oligarchy, you can say, who are pushing, saying, no, we need to actually move further towards the West. And we have to see where things land. Inside of Iran, this Netanyahu was out appealing for people to rise up against the regime, and so, but it's had the opposite effect. Financial Times has had a very interesting piece, a quote, because you see the Basij, which is this paramilitary voluntary force of 12 to 14 million people in Iran. They've been roaming the streets. They've been arresting people. They've been setting up checkpoints everywhere. It's been, doing raids. And a lot of Israeli spies and a lot of just regime oppositionist layers have been arrested. They're using the situations to consolidate themselves. And then there's one Tehranian. So she said, this reminds me of her name is Afsane. She said, this reminds me of the first years after the revolution. That's the years where there was a massive counter-revolution and Basij was slamming in doors, arresting thousands of people, rounding them up. But then she says this, it's unsettling, but also somewhat reassuring to see them near my house. I could never imagine seeing Basijis and feeling happy. So this shows a little bit of what social changes has been taking place. And I think in the next period, we're going to see a conflict between these two factions.
Because what she's saying makes sense in the context of the fact that there were Israeli agents inside the country, there were Israeli drones inside the country, and people feel afraid. There's not just a foreign aggression from outside; it's also coming from inside. Yeah,
exactly. And obviously that puts that means that the future of Iran is now up in the air in a way, and we'll see where it lands. Now, the last question I thought we should discuss was this question of how do we view these conflicts, both in the West and in these less advanced countries. The question of imperialism and imperialist war has always been a controversial one for radical and revolutionary layers. And there's always been a lot of confusion about it, because in the West, for example, there's a lot of talk about the Iranian regime. Some people, let's say, the Iranian regime is supporting, is fighting against U.S. imperialism. We need to give the Iranian regime as much support as possible, right? You've seen this in many ways. Sometimes there's a glorification of the regime, such as the Iranian one, or groups like Hamas. When people want to defend the oppressed masses of that region, want to send help, they want to send aid, one way or another, to help those people who are under the attack of U.S. imperialism. And on the other side, you have people in the region who are often caught in between being opposed to the regime. The Iranian regime is hated by many people. Although, as we can see, American imperialism is much more hated. And there's a swing between rallying behind the regime and then rallying behind American imperialism, because there's also a lot of honest people who say, we hate this regime, this has been oppressing us, and therefore we must support the Americans in order to get rid of them. But what's the way out? What is the...
Yeah, this is an important question. What's the position of revolutionary communists in all of this? I think the question of imperialism is crucial here, right? The most reactionary force on the planet is U.S. imperialism, the most powerful imperialist power on Earth. And we oppose U.S. imperialism. U.S. imperialism will always couch its interventions in terms of human rights, regime change, because we want to bring democracy. But this is the first task, is to completely expose this hypocrisy. I mean, the Saudi regime is not a friend of women or national minorities or workers' rights. Nevertheless, it's very friendly with the United States. That's the only difference. Why the United States is not bombing Saudi Arabia or Bahrain or Qatar or other regimes. This is just, we need to expose this hypocrisy. Trotsky, for instance, was very clear. In the 1930s, there was a war between Italy, which at that time was a fascist regime, and Abyssinia, which is today's Ethiopia, which at that time was a semi-feudal regime ruled by a king, a reactionary king. And he said, the question here is not fascism versus democracy. The political regime of these countries doesn't enter into this, because the main point is this is a war of imperialist aggression. Abyssinia was maybe one of the very few African countries that had not been completely taken over by colonialism. Last remaining independent country in Africa, and therefore he said revolutionary communists are on the side of Ethiopia. We won the military victory of Ethiopia against the military aggression by Italy. But that doesn't mean we want to support. I mean, this was a more complicated question, because other European imperialist powers were not necessarily in favor of Italy dominating Abyssinia. They wanted to dominate themselves. But the workers must always have an independent position, he said. And this doesn't mean that we give any support to the political regime in Abyssinia. No, the workers must stand independently, must fight against imperialism with their own methods, with their own policies, and so on. So it is not complicated. People make it complicated. Why? Because they give into the imperialist, liberal, bourgeois, democratic propaganda, which we should be exposing. So the main task of revolutionary communists in a conflict like this is to fight against our own ruling class, which obviously here in the West is where all the warmongers are. In Britain, in Germany, in France, in the United States. We must denounce this imperialist aggression. In this particular case, by a guy in the United States who said that he didn't want to do that anymore, right? So we need to expose him on his own terms, because many people believed what he was saying. So we are against all sorts of imperialist aggression. Now, to the people of Iran, what do we say? This is the other side of the question. We don't say to the people of Iran, oh, you must support this regime, or you must put your national, social, trade union, working class, democratic demands to one side because now the main struggle is against imperialism. No, what we say is that the best way, the most effective way to really fight against imperialist domination of your country, which we fully oppose, is for the workers to take power, for the workers of Iran to take power and do away with this capitalist regime, which is wasteful, corrupt, and I will say to a certain extent has proven to be lacking in its. Many people will be asking. There was already a surprise Israeli attack before against Hezbollah in Lebanon. They shown that when they killed Haniyeh in Tehran, this proved that they were infiltrated, that the Israeli intelligence was all over the place, and they must have known that they were preparing something. And what did they do? Apparently, not much or nothing, not enough. And so the best way to defend an oppressed country against imperialism is for the workers to put themselves at the head of the whole nation. And that will really rally not only the people of Iran, but that will be an example, an inspiration for the people of the whole region of how to really fight against imperialism.
Yes, I think the US, as you said, is the most reactionary force on the planet. There's no limit to the amount of reactionary, infectious pus that it spreads into the world. And if we want to stop these wars and stop these kind of events taking place, this is where we need to fight it. We need to fight against our ruling classes here in the West, those of us who live in the West, and that would precisely also show the people of places like Iran and other places that we are not their enemies, and that we don't want to overthrow them, and that gives them a stronger hand in their own class struggle, because their regimes are saying, look, these guys, they're all out to get us. The only chance of survival you have is us.
Yes.
So in that sense, the Iranian regime has survived for 50 years now, more than on the basis of what? On the basis of a threat of American imperialism.
Yes.
If we can take away that threat, that means that the class contradictions in Iran can become much more palpable, visible, and express themselves much more forcefully. In Iran, there is a kind of as I said, there is a problem on the left in that, on the one hand, you have some parts of the youth and especially the middle class elements who want democracy, who want a more open society, who say we want what they have in the West basically, and we're sick and tired of these guys. They've been stealing and looting for so many years. We're just going to support anyone but. What we can see in Syria, in Iraq, in Libya, in Afghanistan, we can see what that means
in practice.
In practice, right? It's barbarism. It's not a freely developing democratic society. But then there are other layers who say, no, we have to defend our national sovereignty. We have to defend this regime. They're on the right side of history. They're fighting against U.S. imperialism. And I think it's true. The Iranian national bourgeoisie and sometimes other national bourgeoisies do fight against U.S. imperialism for their own reasons. And they win. And a defeat for U.S. imperialism is a good thing for the world's working class. But there's a limitation to what they can carry out. We see this in Syria, for example. The national bourgeoisie won. Effectively, they defeated the U.S. intervention. But what happened then? Syria rotted up. The Assad regime, supported by the Iranians, they maintained power. They sucked up the resources of the country, and gradually they lost support. So when the day came, they fell like a house of cards. In Lebanon, as long as the Hezbollah was an opposition force, they were supported by the majority of the population. But now. But after in 2014, they basically took over the government of the country, and they carried out the same capitalist policies. They lost support, in other words, which means that this time around, even though there was a big rallying around Hezbollah when they were attacked by Israel, there's a lot of people who were much more hesitant to support them because they carried out the same policies. And in Iran, I think what you said is clear. We are for the defense of Iran, and yeah, the Revolutionary Guards have had significant military successes. They're not completely incompetent, absolutely not. But we also see that their weaknesses is based in the system that they govern. That the level of infiltration. One thing, for example, a lot of these Iranian spies, this is a big question in Iran. They've been recruited. Why? Because of the enormous poverty that exists. And yes, this is obviously mainly a result of the sanctions, of the attacks of American imperialism, but it's also the result of a system which works, of the exploitation of by the few exploiting the many, and with a total alienation between large parts of society and their rulers, who they see as their oppressors. So that's one thing, and also right up through the ranks, the logic of profit and hunting for profit and wealth and enriching yourselves. Obviously, that allows for Israeli intelligence agencies to infiltrate you at a much far higher level, and the general inefficiencies that permeate the whole of the Iranian system, and which has been exposed in this situation. So yeah, that is what we would say. We want to fight against American imperialism, but the working class has to do it in order to do it. Put the arms industry under the control of the working class. Put the democratic rights and elections throughout the army. Develop a revolutionary program and appeal to all of the masses of the region to join up with you. And on that basis, you could burn through the whole region in a revolutionary wave, and which would be unstoppable. And that would, for once and for all, defeat U.S. and Israeli imperialism, which even the Iranian regime, at every point, they never wanted to actually defeat them. Their aim has been to sit at the table, to get a seat at the table so they can become powers in their own right and be recognized, get investments and so on for their own benefits. That was all I had to say. Do you have any final remarks?
No, we're coming to the end of our time, but maybe just one sentence that while all of this is happening, yesterday we had this NATO summit in The Hague, and the one headline decision from that was to massive increase in military spending to 5% of GDP. And I think that this is linked to the other thing that you were saying. We need to fight against our own imperialist ruling class. And that fight takes place not only because they are imperialists, they are oppressing the peoples of other countries and dominated countries in the world, but that policy, that imperialist policy abroad, is the other side of the coin of a war against the working class at home. And we need to link the two things. These austerity measures, cuts in social spending, and so on, is directly related to imperialism and the race to spend more money in weapons. That's what we say: books, not bombs; healthcare, not warfare. And in order to do that, finally, you need to overthrow the capitalist system at home, which is part and parcel of imperialism in this epoch. And for that, we need a revolutionary communist leadership, revolutionary communist organization.
That's a perfect ending for this show. Thank you so much, Jorge. And for the rest of you out there, thank you so much for tuning in. We will be back. We're planning to be back first week of September. Of course, things might happen and we might have to do another special episode, but probably not. Thank you, all of you, for tuning in, and stay tuned for the next episode of the show. Thank you very much.